Well, hello. We've had three so far of these Hogg with Henley series of webinars. This is our fourth and our last in this series, but we will be back again with a similar thing in future. I'm Alec Hogg, and it's my pleasure to be your host as always in this series. And very welcome to all the members of the Biznews community. It's lockdown, how many more days? 8, I think it is, to go. And hopefully we will then be able to start getting a semblance of normality again. But the big question is what happens to small businesses, medium businesses, any entrepreneurs? How do you actually get through all of this? And we're going to help you today through our very special guest who joins us from the UK, Andrew Godley. Andrew is a professor at Henley Business School in the UK. He focuses on entrepreneurship. He knows a heck of a lot about everything, but specifically the food and the pharmaceutical industries. He's got a very long CV, but I think you'll get the gist of his expertise as we go through here. We'll also be joined by Jon Foster-Pedley, who's the Dean of Henley Business School here in South Africa, and he'll give you some insights into the kind of things that Henley can do for entrepreneurs in this country, because after all, this is Henley sponsored. So, and really they do fantastic work. I know a lot of people who have done the MBA with Henley, and it's not like many of the other business schools. It's very practical, very targeted, and very interesting. But we'll get onto that in a moment. The point of the exercise is that Andrew is going to be giving us a presentation through a few slides for about 10 minutes or so. And during this time, you have questions, pop them in. Stuart's going to explain in a moment how that all works, but the whole intention is really to be as interactive as possible. Okay, so you've seen enough of my pretty face. I'm going to switch that off. And Stu, would you go through the technicals for us? Stuart, by the way, is the managing editor at Biznews, in case you didn't know.
Thanks, Alec. Always good to be here. Just quickly, just so that I know the sound and video is coming through, if you can see the front page of the presentations, grab every opportunity and you can hear my voice. There's a little high five signal on the dashboard from the control panel. If you click that, there we go, excellent. So that's all good. We also, as Alec mentioned, like to keep it quite conversational, and the questions are quite key to that process. There's a little questions drop-down menu on the control panel. If you put your questions in there, Alec and myself will pick them up and we'll discuss them as they come through. But Alec, all good to go from my side.
Great, and I've already got Alan Termoshuizen says my sound is not that great. So Alan, I'm actually pushing it up a little bit. Thankfully, I've got a mixer here. If you can just give me a thumbs up if that sounds better. Hopefully it does, because the sound is a little stronger. Anyway, it's all over to you, Andrew. Do you want to take us through your presentation, please, sir?
I'd love to. Good morning, everybody, or I guess it's already afternoon in South Africa. I'm speaking to you from South England. Henley Business School is just to the west of London in the UK, and I set up the Henley Centre for Entrepreneurship there about 10 years ago, after having worked with the then British government in much of the 2000s to help to try and support entrepreneurs and help small businesses to grow their business. And I have to say that, I mean, I visited thousands and thousands of small businesses up and down the country over a period of 7 or 8 years. And that really did impact government policy, but it also impacted me personally. My background was as very much an academic economist and trained in understanding how models work, models of firm behavior, models of markets. And what I began to realize after speaking with small business owner after small business owner after small business owner was that there was something fundamentally wrong with the way that we were supporting them, the way that we were helping them. And that was largely because there were some things they were really good at. They really understood their products. They really understood how they made stuff and how they the technical side of things, but they were really bad at understanding consumer needs and understanding the markets. And so when I came back to the business school, when I came back to teaching, I decided that I was going to create a center that would be supporting students learning about entrepreneurship, but also supporting small businesses in and around the region, and get them really focusing on how to generate sales, how to focus on consumers, how to understand their markets. And so that's kind of the background for what I want to say today. I'll just be very quick. I'll touch on a few points, and I'll tell Alec or Stuart to move the slide on at the appropriate moment. But go back to slide one. That's great. Thanks, Rich. I was just telling you what I was going to do. If you go back to the first slide, could you go back to the first slide, please? The one, yeah, grab every opportunity. So I think that the first thing that I just want to say is that this is a moment in time when clearly everything is up in the air. Big change, historically unprecedented restrictions on individual activity during lockdown. The economic implications of that are severe. Last week in the UK, the official government body to forecast economic activity reckoned that the quarterly reduction in economic activity for this quarter would be a third. So just dramatic restrictions on what seems to be going on. And of course, people are very worried. People are very concerned. But at the same time, this is an opportunity. It's a series of opportunities. And the people who exploit opportunities are entrepreneurs. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking to yourself, what can I do? How can I respond? How can I make the most of this situation? That is an entrepreneur's response. 90% of the population don't think like that. 90% of the population are just dominated by fear and just wanting to hold everything together and go into survival mode to get through this. Entrepreneurs, on the other hand, recognize that opportunities present themselves at times of change. And this is the biggest time of change that most of us will have ever experienced in our lifetime. So what kind of opportunities are they for you and for your business? Well, I mean, I don't know, because the range of businesses that will be represented amongst the people listening and watching this webinar will be much greater than I'll be aware of. But I mean, just what I've seen here in the UK in the last few days tells me that there are entrepreneurs out there in the UK who are responding to the new opportunities that are being presented. So, for example, just to throw two out that I just have come across in the last 2 or 3 days. The restrictions, the lockdown restrictions here on retailing and wholesaling activities and restaurant activities have really thrown the food industry into some chaos, in particular perishable foods. The most perishable food is fresh fish. And so we had reports that the British fishing industry were essentially faced with having to shut up shop. They weren't able to sell their product, and so they were just going to stop sailing. But one trawler family realized that this is an opportunity. They set up a website, they promoted their idea, and what was their idea? Well, do you know what? They were going to do home delivery throughout southern England of all of the fresh fish that they were able to catch. And they were able to promote that, and they were able to get word out. I checked yesterday, they have booked out with all of their delivery slots for the next 2 months. What a response to lockdown, where they've identified an opportunity. Another one, similar sort of analysis, lockdown has meant that garden centres are unable to operate, and the British people, they love their gardens, but if they can't get access to garden centres, they can't get access to new plants. So what are they going to do? Well, one individual has established a new company, a new website, where they're just going to be able to collect all of the plants that are going to be destroyed, and if gardeners get in touch with them, they will then organise delivery to people's homes. What a response to lockdown. What a recognition of an opportunity that is available during the lockdown situation. So entrepreneurs exploit opportunities. That's the first thing to realise. Alex, Stuart, we can go to the next slide now. How do you respond to the opportunities? Well, as I was saying about the work of the Henley Centre for Entrepreneurship, it's very much focused on sales. It's very much focused on trying to help entrepreneurs to identify the real consumer needs. Now, there are lots of tools that you can use to be able to help you to think through what it is you do, what it is you make from a consumer perspective. One is the business model canvas, very well known, disseminated around the world, available for free from the internet. Business model canvas will help you to understand the need to orient your business model around the realities, the real drivers of consumer demand. Another one is design thinking. Again, all of these tools are free to download, free available, very well established over the last 20 years. Design thinking comes from Stanford University, and at the heart of design thinking is this idea that that entrepreneurs should have deep empathy with their consumers. Our model, the Henley Business School model, really focuses on information and the discrepancy in your consumers' information and understanding about the product or the service for many product areas, and the producer's understanding of how products or services work. And that gap, that information gap, is actually a real dilemma for producers and consumers. Because what it means is that even when producers know that the product is really good and would solve consumer needs, consumers are actually not going to trust the producers until they've been able to overcome that information gap. And so it's up to producers, it's up to entrepreneurs, when they're introducing new things, new products, new services, to walk consumers through this information gap and to elicit, to gain their trust, and so to help consumers reach the point where they're happy to make that purchase. And there's lots of ways and strategies that that you can do to be able to do that. But at the core of this is this idea that we have as entrepreneurs, we've got to be able to gain consumers' trust so that they will then buy our products and services. I think we can go to the next slide. Oh, change. Yes, this is none of us like change, right? You can see from the picture that we're not very good at dealing with change. And as I was saying earlier, you know, there's the immediate need to cope with lockdown, to cope with the immediate restrictions on our behavior and on the activities of the people around us. But more fundamentally, I think it's really important for all of us to think through, has this been a genuine moment of change, of real cultural change? Has COVID-19, has lockdown, has this prospect of a virus this silent enemy, has this so fundamentally changed the way that societies think about what are acceptable norms? I think it has. I mean, I think that the impact of this in the UK, as I'm following what people are saying on social media and as it's being reported in the media, it seems to me that this is a fundamental moment of change, and that there is a real sense of people wanting to emphasize the significance of community, of rewarding those people that really serve the community, and that has happened, and that is new. So that there is like a zeitgeist. Oh, I'm getting some.
Yeah, I see John has somehow logged in twice. John, would you just mute your microphone for a minute? And Andrew, it's quite a long 10 minutes. Would you mind pushing it on a little? Okay.
Well, so just the you need to just think through what does it mean if this is a real cultural moment of cultural change? What does it mean for your brand? Think that through. Okay, let's go to the next slide. What was the next slide? Oh yes, and of course, and despite the emergency, despite the fact that we're all recognizing that there is this real urgency to respond to the crisis, don't forget the future hasn't ended. There is an environmental crisis that we will still need to respond to. There are new technologies out there that we haven't yet begun to understand the commercial applications for. So don't forget that the future still counts. And that's it. Is that a bit longer than 10 minutes? I'm sorry.
Excellent, no problem at all, Andrew. We've just got a lot of questions, and I didn't want to disappoint anybody by not giving them the benefit of the opportunity of having you on this webinar today. Jon Foster-Pedley is indeed with us. John, from a South African perspective, I'm sure you endorse pretty much everything that Andrew said, specifically the idea that this is big change, and entrepreneurs do thrive in a changing environment. You couldn't really ask for more change than we're going through now.
Well, that's true in the sense that those entrepreneurs who are used to dealing with so much uncertainty and turbulence have got it. They've gone from a gentle whitewater ride to a fearsome one now. So I think they are quite well placed. But of course, they're more vulnerable in a sense quite often because of their cash flow and the other issues, and they're vulnerable to large companies and clients who might withhold payments. So yeah, they're well placed to deal with it, but they've got pretty significant challenges.
John, you might be the right person to pick up on the first question from Philip Berger. He is referring doubtless to President Cyril Ramaphosa's speech last night, the 500 billion rand that's going to be injected into the economy. And he wants to know which industries will benefit from this, from the grants going to I suppose, the indigent people and people who are on social grants, and looking forward perhaps to the infrastructure boom, which is quite obvious that if that's going to happen, the infrastructure companies. But do you have any thoughts on that?
It's a tricky one, isn't it, Alex? I mean, the thing is, some of the really heavyweight industries are struggling and maybe have to lay off. You want to support those, but then the industries that are so dependent on face-to-face or on discretionary purchase, where somebody could delay the purchase, or where there's some sort of physical or health sort of deep requirement around them, tourism, and traditional education are all going to suffer. And if they can't shift to virtual, then the very big chance that they'll struggle very deeply. So it's worth holding those up, because you could argue that the industries we need going forward to transition South Africa are more in the service and creative and high-tech area to produce a diversified economy. So it's a delicate balance between keeping those ones alive that are going to serve the future and keeping those ones alive that are providing a lot of current employment. So it's a difficult dilemma.
Andrew, from a global perspective, what are the sectors that you are seeing that perhaps an entrepreneur can look at, and because whatever happens globally will happen in South Africa as well, and start doing their homework and trying to understand those consumers? Are there any sectors in particular that jump out at you?
I mean, I think that we're all very aware that we need to be able to use technology in new ways. So there's a much greater emphasis on exactly what we're doing right now, which is communicating globally using P2P network type software. But actually, the applications of that, it seems to me, can be done. I mean, you could develop, I could see how you could develop a tourism business by remote tourism. I could see how you can develop a whole range of businesses that utilize the technology but apply it to areas that are going to be hugely damaged by the continuing restrictions, the lockdown restrictions, what we would expect to be the continuing social distancing restrictions that are likely to carry on for many, many months. So I don't really think that there are so many. I don't think that it's for people like me to say that this can't happen and that can't happen, because I think that entrepreneurs are so creative, they can come up with ideas of how to create new business models in precisely those business areas that are currently under threat.
Interesting point, and it takes me back to the dawn of the internet. I was one of those lucky guys who got in early, 1997. I remember at the time there was a virtual game drive website called Africam, where what they did was they put cameras up in the game reserves at waterholes. So people all over the world presumably could watch as the animals came to those waterholes. Now, exactly the point that you made a moment ago about tourism, it didn't really take off back then because the technology wasn't that great. Bandwidth was pretty scratchy. But can you imagine today, people who have this have a bug to get to the bush, and you can't get to the bush yet until the lockdown ends? Maybe there's an opportunity for some entrepreneur who is in one of the game reserves to start sharing that with the rest of us. Jon, I guess it is just a question of what we were talking about last week, creativity. Allow your mind to wander, and who knows what could come up.
Well, I think desperation and urgency is a wonderful mother of creativity as well. It does force us into situations when you have to pay their school fees. So I think you've seen quite a lot. I mean, immediately my kids are having music lessons online. My wife is doing gym online. I see if you go onto Airbnb now, they're giving you virtual tours, and you can have cooking lessons with the top chefs in the world. Suddenly, all these virtual offerings have appeared worldwide, and you've seen people multiplying their income. So certainly there are some industries that are very well placed to deal with this, and there are other industries that are particularly vulnerable. If you're in a vulnerable one, you've really got a couple of options. One, if you've got the money, you can diversify by non-organically by acquisition. And if you're smart enough and you do what you did with understanding the digital world quickly, you can switch to different types of products and services. But some people are already trapped in it. What do you do? Essential services, fine. But what do you do in a mining situation if you have a very high infection rate, for example? And then so the answer there is, right, let's innovate and mechanize the mines. What do you then do with the people you don't need anymore? So these are the sort of dilemmas we're facing. What it offers for entrepreneurs is, as you said, a way to think again. I think one often has to try and step back and have a very good detached view of the landscape, situational awareness, where the opportunities are, and really bottle one's nerve and take some deep breaths and try and see where the needs are, what people really want. And from there, especially if you have some unusual relationships with partners you wouldn't normally work with, you can quite often come up with new value propositions. And it's definitely a time to be bold, because you you haven't got an awful lot to lose sometimes. So dive in and have a try and energize that learning gene.
Love it,
Alec?
Jon. There's a really good question here, and we do have a lot, so I'm going to try and get onto these questions. Vanessa Bowman asks, how do you walk the fine line of not coming across as an opportunist in a negative way when you're trying new strategies in the market right now? Andrew?
I think that's comes down to how you're communicating with your market, how you're branding. You can make explicit statements. There's one company I saw were talking about doing something in response to the crisis, and then said that all of their profits are going to go to support NHS workers, so the health service or whatever. So there's some, you can make explicit statements that indicate that you are doing this new venture as a direct response to the crisis and the emergency of the situation. So that's a really good way to just communicate very explicitly with your target audience at this time.
It's very interesting in our industry, which I'm talking about the publishing industry, which is under huge pressure. And unfortunately, because of the precedents that were created when the internet first began in the late 90s, many of the media companies are now in a fuss because they are giving away their content for free and trying to move to a model which is more sustainable and going out of business in the process because they can't do it quickly enough. But what has happened is that with COVID-19, the public are demanding that everything on COVID-19 is free. And because of that history, and of course, the problem with that is that you're already going out of business if you're a media company. How can you now give away the focus of all of your staff, which is on COVID-19, obviously at the moment, and then just go out of business quicker? So these are dilemmas. These are real issues that are faced by businesses from day to day. Jon, there is a question here from Lucky Economides who asks, will there be an increase in insolvencies and liquidations, and to what extent? I know in Business Day this morning they're talking about 40% of companies say they're not going to make it through. What's your thought?
It's an imponderable, isn't it? I mean, one has to do scenarios in this, and obviously the worst case scenario, if you take up a long-term infection rates and long distancing, etc., and a higher than expected mortality rate, which will probably force more close down, you are going to have the potential for that sort of level of insolvencies. But this is where government support and as an ecosystem we can work with each other. I mean, if you really think about, going back to your past question as well, which is, how do you not seem opportunist? The worst thing you can do is in a sense go out of business and make it very hard for you to recover and increase the burden of debt and unemployment. So it's a very good thing to stay in business. So while you might think you're capitalizing on the pain of COVID by offering services, which I think it's a very good idea to do that, because you do find products and services that people need. What you mustn't do is profiteer. And that's the dialogue we must have. You must have a fair profit, and that's a difficult ethos. So we've got to get government support. We've got to support each other. Business for South Africa, for example, is doing excellent work in trying to frame the thinking and the support processes through the funding and through helping governments see where to fund. But we are in a difficult position. What I would say is I was brought up in England, and I would go out in my military days in the cold weather, and you suffer from exposure. And what happens is your extremities start getting frostbite because your blood goes to the center of your body to keep it alive. And it's a bit like some of these companies. You've got to perhaps sacrifice some parts of your business to keep the core alive, ready for the upsurge. It's very bad to go out of business. So feel you're doing a social service to stay in business, are you?
Excellent. I think that really does encapsulate it well. Philip Berger added, I think, to an earlier question to say people receiving grants will most likely spend on food and clothes in the current environment. Angela Lamson tells us that the Kruger Park is doing virtual game drives during lockdown. Well, good for them. And Trevor Goldenhuis says that Shamwari Game Farm is also doing a video game watching. Well, it just shows that even these these very practical or very touchy type operations like game farms, private game farms and public game farms have picked up the reality that if nobody's visiting, let's take it to them. Andrew, that might open a whole international market for the Kruger Park.
Yeah, and I think that then the next stage is to think, well, how can we then design additional revenue lines? How can we design additional extensions to that would generate cash? And then you get into some quite interesting areas of thinking. I was in Nigeria last year in Lagos teaching a group of entrepreneurs, one of whom was from the tourism sector, and her idea, which we worked on a bit, was to try and promote tourism within Nigeria by focusing on regional foods. And so she made a series of documentaries about the different foods in different bits of Nigeria, how they were made. And obviously the documentaries focused on real authenticity and real ethnic specialities, and were made with great humor, and they've gone on to achieve great success. But the importance now is that in Nigeria, in those states that are trying to develop their tourism and there are no visitors going to them, they've suddenly got this alternative revenue line, that they've got this alternative mechanism to be able to gain additional revenue into their businesses, because they're able now to promote their food sectors and their food products through the avenue of this documentary series that is being promoted. They've got a platform to promote what they're doing. So there are always alternative ways to be able to think about how to extend your revenue lines away from what has been the traditional source.
Well, let's look at some alternatives to answer David Scott's question, which is what new opportunities are emerging as a result of online communications opening up and becoming more familiar and understood. Jon?
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I was just looking around recently at some examples of this, and there's hotels that have gone from stay-at-home hotel experiences. So they catering and delivering catering. There's a restaurant booking app has switched to booking retail visits, so you can go to your Woolworths, whatever. I mean, I remember Dyson. Remember Dyson? They've now aggressively gone in producing ventilators at high quality, relatively low cost. There's old IP share as well on ventilators is going around, so that manufacturing companies can, if they've got the capability, can switch into relatively low tech but low cost too effective ventilators built in country. So there's a number of those sort of things happening. You know, art courses, as I said, leading chefs teaching to do it at home. So there's quite a lot of switching going on. I think it's only limited by your imagination. There's a certain it's quite difficult to detach oneself from the excitement and the years of embeddedness into what you think your business is. But if you can get people to help you think that, and there are some creative agencies out there and some individuals helping, you can probably review your business again. And who was that? Clayton Christensen from Harvard. He wrote a wonderful series he wrote some articles and some great videos you can see. He died recently, but a tremendous character on the job to be done. And he talked about why did people buy this just chocolate sundae driving into work, and everyone thought it's because, and one of the reasons was because it lasted a long time while they were driving and they could sip and suck it. So think really, what is the job to be done? What are people renting you for and your business for? What are they really doing it for? And when you see that, you can often see services outside your current products and services that you could effectively fill the gap with.
Brilliant. And of course, thanks for mentioning my hero, Clay Christensen. All 6'8" of him, I think. He was one of the tallest people I've ever spoken. Well, I'm not that tall, but he's one of the guys that looks down on you. But there's a very interesting part. I was looking through some of my old notebooks the other day, going back 15 years to an event that I was at abroad, where Nicholas Nassim Taleb was. It was a workshop that we were at. And he made the point there, and I'm sure he's done it in many of his books as well, that the world is moving towards scalability. And he spoke about opera singers. He used that. And I think, David, this is something just to bear in mind. In the past, opera singers in Italy, everybody had jobs. If you weren't that good, you would go and sing in a village. If you were a little bit better, you would maybe sing in a town. If you were top class, you would sing in Rome. But then along came the CDs, and suddenly every opera singer had to compete with Pavarotti. Of course, today it's got even more competitive in that market, and he uses that to just explain scalability. What I'm thinking now is the whole circuit speakers, the whole presentations that are being done. Suddenly, if people are used to using Zoom or Google Hangout or Skype, they can now access, or will be more prepared to access, via their video screen or via their computers than they might have done before. So the scalabilities of anything pretty much that you had to do face-to-face in the past suddenly comes into the picture. And I guess you could translate that into coaching, education. I mean, from your side, Andrew, that surely will present all kinds of opportunities for Henley being able to spread its message more broadly.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks very much for that. I mean, we yesterday we were hosting webinars, myself and Jon, with some of the community in Johannesburg, and I guess that we probably had 350 plus individuals that were listening into that. Obviously, in previous times, we would have just had an event at Henley, South Africa in Johannesburg. And I guess if we'd been really well organized, really well promoted, we might have got 30 or 40 people. So suddenly the new technology, the ability to be able to broadcast in this way, absolutely, it scales up possibilities. And that's great. And that has obviously enormous implications, potential implications for education and for business schools in particular. But I think the other thing to recognize is that with any scaling up of any kind of service or any kind of product, by definition, what that does is it imposes a standard. And so by definition, what that then also does is it presents lots of opportunities for customization around the edges. For individual entrepreneurs to be able to recognize what is it that's scaling up that's relevant to me in my business space. And if I don't have the capabilities to capitalize on that scaling up because it's being done by, I don't know, Facebook or Google or one of the great giants, then what can I do to customize around the edges? How can I be flexible and nimble to be able to create a revenue stream that recognizes that some of my former business is going to be taken away by these enormous transitions and this scaling up of activities? What can I then do that can add value around the edge of this?
I love the whole idea of adding value. Too often one can hide away in big organizations. Let's just, George Mayring says, seems like the virtual game drive has really got our community buzzing. He says, have a look at hashtag Wild Earth or hashtag Safari Live on YouTube. Daily live safaris, over 12,000 viewers on board. Thanks, George. And then Ed Braz says, the virtual bush drives already exist. See twice daily drives brought to you on Facebook Watch and Beyond Travel. Great. Okay, and another one, and another one. Okay, I'm gonna drop the virtual game drives for the moment. Alan asks, it seems to me that the one entity that government is not supporting is the small self-employed entrepreneur that has kept their overheads and debt low and now has no income. There was a similar question from Steve Collenbrander, who says, why must we pay VAT and tax across to government in full when we are told we cannot trade? It is our right to trade freely, but we are not able to, and that VAT and tax must be vital to paying salaries to survive. Something doesn't stack up for me here. Jon, do you want to have a go at those two? Clearly frustrated entrepreneurs with what's going on in lockdown.
I think he's absolutely right, actually. I mean, there's a number of things under these circumstances you have to change. if you look at the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, which I know that obviously Andrew knows intimately, and I was on the board of in New Zealand at one time, you'll see that the conditions for entrepreneurial success are really created in some ways by government, and these are and also conditions for inhibiting growth. And I think South Africa has not been particularly heroic in this respect. It's too much red tape, too slow. It can take a long time to get approvals, and that's something we can really get right. UIF, VAT, subsidies, deferred payments, all these things are needed right now. And I think policy is always historically slow. But this is a time when good government just bites a bullet and makes some brave choices to keep those companies alive. I don't think you should be quiet about it. I think you should make a noise about it. I think you shouldn't be shy, and I think a lot of people support it, and I think it's the right thing to do. So please keep talking about that, and let's get some policy changes.
Hundreds of billions have been allocated. Let's start tapping into it. You certainly, from the media perspective, you can be sure we will continue to put the pressure on there for delivery. Ed Braz asks, with the ease of access to virtual events, how does a producer monetize the opportunity? That's a good one, because it almost gets back a little bit to the dilemma that the media industry finds itself into, having given everything away for free. Gents, any thoughts?
Yeah,
I'll have a go. I mean,
oh, sorry, John.
After Andrew.
Oh,
after you.
We're being too polite to each other here.
So English.
So I hesitate to say this, but to go back to tourism and game parks and my Nigerian example, the ability to be able to introduce a new product range there was associated with creating a documentary that was focusing on food, that led to food sales that could be promoted from those particular regions. It led to books, it led to magazines, it led to a whole host of different products that would normally never have been thought of by a game park or by a tourism region that are wanting to attract visitors to that particular location. But actually they began to realize that, well, we can create different authentic experiences associated with a location that people can buy, and then they can be shipped out all around the world. So it's just about being creative in the way that we think about what it is that we have to offer, and working out what it is that we have that we offer, and how that can then be delivered to consumers that are interested in what we have, but it can be delivered to them in their own homes, whether it's through tangible products or virtual.
Okay, John, your call.
Yeah, I mean, I read The Guardian quite a lot. It's quite a good newspaper, and the editor, I think, I was at school with it. And and they went to a sort of subscription model, voluntary subscription model. They decided that if we did really good journalism, people would love the brand, they would come to us, and they would suffer if that brand disappeared. And would you please volunteer? And they politely ask repetitively, would you contribute? And they've had enormous success in that. So it goes to the sense of credibility, trust, brand, and experience. You have to build trust. The barriers to entry to online are quite small at the sort of, beginning level. But you don't have to have glorious production to understand that you can have emotive content and connectivity and stickiness. You can have personality online, and that's really important. You can be positive. You can also be challenging, and people want to go to those people and places that talk up and raise the questions in all our heads. So you create some form of brand. You create reliability and trust. You can go there for this. If I think about how we're doing it at Henley, exactly the same problem. We've started a free series of entrepreneurship to help SMEs convert to digital, which Andrew's and we're running. So we've immediately got Andrew and his whole team from the UK in country. That's fantastic, because they're really good, and they run one of the best entrepreneurial centers in Europe. We get them online, and then we give a whole series of these 12 or 15 free sessions, which please anyone can just log into. Go to the Henley website and you'll find them there. These SME sessions, they're really good. Then what we'll do is we'll take those and we'll keep some of the content online. We'll put a paywall for that, and then we'll offer some advice. Or we'll package those, send them into companies, or get large organizations to sponsor those, so that we can get 5,000 entrepreneurs, and we'll say, let's say we get a good bank or somebody else to sponsor those entrepreneurs to attend it, so they can build up they can grow their supplier base and give them more skills to navigate this. So there are a number of ways you can give up freebies and starters for people to be interested in, and then add money to those later by adding value. And the final thing I would say is that when you're managing experiences, you need empathy, you need to imagine what it's like in that experience, and you need design. You need to design that experience, rather like a narrative, a story. You have the opening act, the middle, a denouement, and the sort of summary, and you need to provide takeaways that synthesize what's going on. If you add all those elements of value, people will absolutely pay for what you do because you've designed something that's enormously useful to them. So that's exactly. Very quickly, all the game reserves will be do their virtual tours. And what's the differentiation? Well, it will be the personality or the depth of analysis, or even if you curate content rather than creating it. You can create your own content, and then you can curate it by opening avenues to watch these 15 TED Talks or whatever. And you're helping people by doing their interpretations, sense making for them.
The whole freemium model, which Chris Anderson's written about in depth, go and read his books. In fact, he's written a couple of really books, good books on the subject. And he's the guy who started TED Talks afterwards. He was the founder of Wired magazine, so he certainly has got his head into the future. Trevor Gildenas, and I'm going to read this whole thing because it's actually quite valuable. He says, I'm part of a group of executives who are looking to support entrepreneurs. The group is made up of venture capital funders, mentors, coaches, marketing specialists, HR consulting and recruitment specialists, etc. The question is, some of these companies cannot afford the services that will ensure that they do not close within the first 2 years. Where is big business and government support for these companies for support assistance on a more macro scale? There are some amazing organizations running incubators and supporting entrepreneurs, but we need more financial and practical support during those first 18 months for these entrepreneurs. It's a really good point that we do have people starting businesses, putting their necks on the line, taking money out of their home loans, hocking themselves to the hilt, but in those first 18 months, perhaps not making it. And that story gets onto others. And well, if you thought you might give it a try, Joe down the road wasn't that successful, and look at where he lives now. How do you address a question like that, Jon?
Well, I'll have a quick answer, but I think Andrew's be a brilliant person to answer that, because that's exactly what he does. I mean, he's developed some really good entrepreneurship incubators. A really good one in Reading in the UK that's been very successful. I think you should mention it. But my brief answer to that is that it's very hard to make incubators work financially. It's a royalty, revenue, or rental models to try and get, if you're supporting an incubator. And the reality is that incubators can work, but clustering environments. I mean, if you look at the work of Richard Florida, who wrote about the rise of creative class and the development of good cities and good regions, he talks about the 3 T's, which is talent. You've got to attract really good talent and educated talent. You've got to provide education. You need tolerance. So he got the gay index, the bohemian index, and the alien index. If you have a high number of those sort of fringe, as it were, in some of the traditional environments, more fringe or different, or diverse communities, you're going to have more innovation. He found it was a really interesting hypothesis to test it. And then, of course, technology. You need to provide good tech and very good infrastructure for connectivity. And then you get creativity emerging out of the region rather than incubators. So it's a complex problem to deal with. But I'd love to hear Andrew's answer to that.
Andrew?
Thanks. I mean, I think that we have to realize that it's going to be a really, really difficult 6 months, 9 months for startups, early stage firms that need funding. I think that that there's just no getting around the fact that all of those companies that are trying to grow quickly and scale up but aren't yet at the point where their revenues are covering all of their costs, and so they're depending upon private investors, business angels, friends and families, whatever it might be. It's going to be really, really difficult to persuade investors to put money in under the current situation. So John was right. We've set up a business angel community that is very engaged with the local community. We're trying to keep things going, trying to put on virtual events, but I can tell the appetite from our angel investors has really diminished at the moment. And quite understandably, they're looking at their own personal financial situation. They're realizing that much of their own asset basis is needing to be revalued and reassessed. So the fundamentals for those entrepreneurial businesses that are wanting to really grow and accelerate are really challenging at the moment. In the UK, government is trying to step in a little bit. They've mentioned that they will introduce a plan where they will match fund venture capital investment. They haven't made mention of business angels, so venture capital funding. So we'll see, but there is an intention in the UK government to try and support the dynamic entrepreneurial sector with funding, but actually it's really difficult to work out how you can do that.
Yeah, a big question and a dilemma that is also being applied in this country as well, Andrew. Denise Kemp says there's no support for business events industry, only for leisure tourism. I'm not so sure, Denise, but anyway, I think our two gents would say that just get creative, and maybe you can have these events that you had in the past that you charge for. The only problem is the numbers are going to be very different. What people are prepared to pay for. Carl Dos Santos says, I'm simply not paying VAT at the moment. I'd rather pay salaries and creditors. The 400,000 I'm saving on VAT is needed to run the business. SARS can fight me later. Well, I think there are, John, if I listened to the president correctly, there are some allowances from the tax man that you can defer the payment of VAT. I don't know if you looked at that detail.
Yeah, I read the speech afterwards, and there are a number of measures that's sitting inside there. There's a social relief and economic support package of 500 billion, 10% of GDP. That's the sort of numbers we need to be looking at. But the detail and specifics in some cases need to be thrashed out. But I'm fairly confident. I mean, the truth is there's no vested interest for anybody here not to support the economy. There's certainly not for the government. A failing economy will mean a failing president. He doesn't want that. The dance he has to make is a very, very difficult one around health consequences. The health consequences and the fatality rate of COVID could take us up to a lot of people, and you could reduce that significantly if you close down for a long time. But then you get the second part of the equation is, well, what are the health consequences and life expectancy consequences of a closed down economy, particularly among the poor? And you quickly start to get more consequences there. So this is a really, really difficult situation, and you can't find a simplistic answer. You need an answer with elegant simplicity, but not overly simple to deal with the problem. So in this case, you're going to find the government moving as quick as they can, but having to make some tough decisions. And in some cases, revenues needed as well. So where you can get the VAT back into the fiscus, then you've got a chance of supporting those areas which might not be in your immediate interest, but might be in your children's longer term interest, funnily enough. It's a really difficult thing to deal with.
Yeah, if there's one thing the one message that has come through loud and clear from we do a daily Inside COVID-19 podcast and talking to people from all over the world, and many here in South Africa as well, some really, really fine minds. And the one thing that is coming through here is that the ecosystem needs to be considered. It is highly complex, which reinforces what you've just said now, John. And whatever, if you push in one area, it's a bit like a waterbed. If you push it down in one area, it's going to be bulging up somewhere else. So there are all kinds of unintended consequences of actions, which means that the right way to do things is cautiously and carefully, so that you don't go and blow it all on one knee-jerk reaction. And so far, the president, and certainly South Africa, has done it that way. Let's see how things go further on. But I would urge you, those of you who haven't been tapping into that podcast, to do it. There's just some amazing content. I think we're now on episode 22, so tonight will be episode 23. Anyway, Edward Colley asks, do you think that Cyril will have the political courage to make significant ministerial changes in the next few months? If he doesn't, seems like a once-in-a-lifetime missed opportunity. John, if you don't mind, I think we're going to pass on that one. Then fiat money is a currency.
Just about to dive in, but anyway.
Do you really want to go into politics? I mean, are we qualified to
what
talk
I
about
want to
what's
say
happening in
there,
the cabinet?
well, I don't think that's. I'm not going to talk about the politics, but I'm going to say that there's choices to be made here. What's the role of business? You know, we've divided politics and business and into different estates for so long, but there's another point here. You need leadership. We need leadership to build the economy. And what is business's role then? Is it separate, or is it more supporting a group of people who you think will solve that? So we as business people have got choices to make here. We're not in as you say, it's a complex system and all the moving parts are connected. If you believe in something, then you've got to put some weight behind it. You can't be sitting on a fence here, because that's not going to work. So to what extent do we hold our nose and support things you might not have done before? But certainly business can't be separate from government anymore. And that's what Business for South Africa is doing. It's committing itself to helping the nation and supporting the government as much as it can, but also calling out on corruption and misdeeds. And I don't think either business or government can do this independently. We're at a really interesting time now where we have to work together in novel ways.
No doubt. And that answer was brilliant. I think what he was getting at is members of the cabinet that perhaps are not as palatable to most of us because of the way that they have behaved. And will Cyril be able to eject them? And that's the question that I think is probably not. Everybody has their view and their speculation. We're coming to the end of the webinar now, but we've got a lot of questions. So I'm just going to chuck a couple at you quickly, gents. Monetization is largely as a result of perceived value. How does one determine potential perceived value without considering own bias? Wow, that's a bit difficult. Steve Buck, I'm going to rather move on to something that is a little more direct, if you don't mind. The question here was, please could you, from Caroline Dassenville, please could you repeat the information about Henley's free course on how to convert your business into a more digital company? John?
Sure. It's on so Andrew's team in the UK, who are really good at this. Some really good group of international academics and entrepreneurs teaching on that as well as local entrepreneurs. Very good people. So it's at 4 o'clock every day for the next 11-12 days. You go onto our website, which is henleysa.ac.za, and look around on the homepage there, and you'll find a link to these talks. And you go and sign up, and it's absolutely free, about an hour and a half. Really good people. We're doing it as a service to the nation. And one of the other services we're doing is we're sharing everything we've learned about virtual education, and we've done extremely well so far. We're sharing that freely with all the public universities and other webinars and our competitive business schools as well, our competing business schools, because we have to. Our belief is we've really got to collaborate to drive up capability for the sake of the nation, and narrow ideas of competitiveness are just irrelevant compared with the bigger picture. So come and join us there, and you'll listen to a range of people. You'll get some contacts, and we'd be delighted to have you. I think it's a growing community. We had 300 or 400 yesterday, and I expect there'll be more and more. And you're very welcome. There's no strings attached. There's no quid pro quo. Just come and pitch in and ask questions and push us to deliver.
And well done to you guys. We've had this series of 4, of which today is the final one with Biznews, but making ground in an area, opening up a whole new opportunity for a business school in going online. I'm just going to throw one last question to you, Andrew, and that comes from Philip, and I think it's it's a little bit like motherhood and apple pie, but it's the kind of thing we forget about often. I remember Warren Buffett saying, if you want to go into business, you better learn accounting because accounting is the language of business. And what Philip says, one of the secrets for small business, keep fixed costs low and super control variable costs. Andrew, I guess that's a credo that we can all ascribe to.
Yeah, there's some lovely models out there that help us to think creatively about business, but never to lose the focus on keeping costs low. There's something called the effectuation approach, where is a kind of a really low risk approach to what you can lose, called the affordable loss principle. And some of these things we'll be talking about, as John was mentioning, over the next few weeks in the series through Henley.
Well, there's my camera back on, so you can see it isn't a cardboard cutout. It's Alec Hogg here. It's been such a pleasure to be with you today. Thanks for joining us, Biznews community, and I think you've got some pretty good pointers. We're going to continue with a series of webinars for our Biznews Premium subscribers with a whole bunch of different things coming up in the next few weeks. But from to Henley, thank you for having this series, the last 4 webinars with us. It's been a pleasure, John, to have you here in my computer and sharing
thank you,
your
Alec. It's been very well.
Sharing
Thank you for hosting this so well. And sorry, you're breaking up.
Well, thanks for sharing your wisdom with our community, Andrew. Lovely having you on today. We definitely, I think, saved the best for last. Many entrepreneurs will have taken much of what you said today and will enable them to perhaps also improve the way that they look at things. It isn't a disaster for an entrepreneur. Change, as you said, is an opportunity. And I think you don't have to be shy about that. It doesn't mean that because you are looking at the world as offering opportunities, that you are now being profiteering or opportunistic, as it were. So thank you, gentlemen, and look forward to having you back at some time in future. And from me, Alec Hogg, and to the members of the Biznews community, look forward to the next time. Cheerio.